Beneath a significant portion of the United States, from the Gulf Coast through the Tornado Alley corridor and along the Rocky Mountain Front Range, lies a soil composed heavily of expansive clays. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that 1 in 4 homes in the United States experiences some form of damage caused by these expansive soils, resulting in an estimated $7 billion in annual structural losses. And at the center of this geological phenomenon is bentonite. I'm sure you've heard of it before. It's formed from the weathering of volcanic ash and seawater, and bentonite is dominated by the clay mineral montmorillonite, and it's characterized by an extreme shrink swell capacity, and during periods of inundation it can expand to nearly 15 times its dry volume, and it will exert pressures exceeding 30,000 pounds per square foot. However, during a record drought, the clay aggressively sheds this moisture, and in this video we're going to examine the diametrically opposed roles of bentonite clay during drought conditions, because geotechnically, desiccation strips the soil of its structural integrity, it creates a cascade of infrastructure failures, and agriculturally, the introduction of bentonite to vulnerable, degraded soils serves as a very critical buffer, and it preserves soil moisture, microbial diversity, and enzymatic activity when water is scarce. So, to better understand bentonite's reaction to a drought, one must first look at its microscopic structure. And I'm going to get highly technical here for a second, so bear with me. Montmorillonite belongs to the smectite group of phyllosilic minerals. Its crystal lattice consists of an octahedral sheet of alumina sandwiched between 2 tetrahedral sheets of silica. The bonds between these 3 sheet layers are exceedingly weak, and they allow for water molecules and the exchangeable cations, typically sodium or calcium, to easily penetrate the inner layer spaces. Sodium bentonite, in particular, possesses a highly expansive crystal lattice, and so when water enters that, the basal spacing between the molecular layers increases dramatically. And during a record drought, the thermodynamic equilibrium shifts, and as a surface evaporation outpaces precipitation, the capillary tensions within the soil pores increase. Water is forcibly drawn out from between those montmorillonite layers, so as the interstitial water is lost, the interparticle cementation weakens, the volume of the soil matrix collapses, and the macroscopic desiccation networks form. Deep cracks. In plain English, I said bentonite swells when it's wet because water sneaks between the microscopic layers, and a drought reverses that. And then the water is yanked out, the layers collapse back together, the clay shrinks, and the ground cracks. So when bentonite shrinks really heavily during a drought, it structurally compromises the environment built above it. Differential settlement, basically. So heavy loads, such as like a home's foundation, masonry chimney, they might be able to resist the shifting soil, but a lighter connected structures like concrete patios, sidewalks, and driveways can't. And as the clay shrinks and pulls away from the concrete, it creates these subterranean voids, and the unsupported concrete eventually cracks and settles into this void. So the deep desiccation cracks formed during drought serves as an immediate, unimpeded conduit for surface water, right? It just fills in that void because water always seeks its own level. So when the drought breaks via a sudden storm, water rapidly bypasses the surface, it saturates the deep clay layers, and it triggers a fairly violent and uneven swelling and heaving, and it will shatter anything weak, especially weak foundations. So the USDA notes that over half of the areas in the US contain some degree of expansive soils. Don't worry, not everywhere. The damage is most acute in regions experiencing volatile climate cycles, a lot like where I live in Colorado and Wyoming. Areas like Texas are all particularly susceptible because they have extended arid periods that completely desiccate the bentonite, which maximizes its shrinkage potential before the eventual rain returns. So engineers have different ways to combat the effects of drought-induced bentonite shrinkage, mostly through mechanical bypasses and chemical stabilization. So one mechanical way is a piering system. Because the surface clay is heavily influenced by seasonal drought, structural engineers like to use deep piering systems to bypass the active zone entirely. So helical piers, steel push piers, those are driven like sometimes 75 feet into the stable bedrock that's like below a structure, so it just isn't affected by any voids. And then there's also the chemical stabilization, which is like a polymer amendment. And a lot of recent research has heavily focused on chemically altering bentonite so that it no longer reacts to drought cycles at all. Lime and fly ash stabilization is another one, and that's where they add hydrated lime to bentonite, and it initiates a cation exchange. I won't bug you with the chemistry of it, but it pulls the clay sheets tighter together, and over time the calcium reacts with the silica and the alumina in the clay to form a calcium silicate hydrate, which permanently cements the soil, basically. There was a study in 2016 that demonstrated that treating fly ash with just 20% bentonite and 13% lime yielded unconfined compressive strength that exceeded 7,000 kilopascals, which is over 1,000 pounds per square inch. Crazy. So it basically eliminated the swell potential. Biopolymers is another one. In 2024 and 25, there was a surge in geotechnical studies that explored eco-friendly polymers, and that research demonstrates that adding sodium carboxymethyl cellulose or xanthan gum to bentonite significantly reduced the volumetric shrinkage there as well. So those polymers coat the clay particles and trap the water within their molecule structures and then enhance the elastic connections. So by drastically improving the clay's resistance to wet-dry cycles, it basically eliminated desiccation cracking. So on one hand, we have civil engineers spending billions trying to neutralize bentonite. And then on the other hand, we have agricultural scientists that are actively utilizing it to build climate resilience. The very property that causes foundations to fail, the ability to relentlessly hoard and trap water, makes bentonite an invaluable soil amendment in degraded or sandy agricultural lands. So drought severely degrades soil quality because it halts biological functions. Although there was a comprehensive 2023 review, and that was called Bentonite Impact on Soil Properties and Biological Activity in the Face of Drought, found that bentonite acts as a biological lifesaver, basically. The soil fertility relies on enzymes for nutrient cycling, and the drought halts this process. And then bentonite, due to its gel-like structure, retains micro-reservoirs of water that protects soil organisms and directly increases the enzyme production and activity even when surface water is critically low. And then it also allows for microbial diversity. That same study concluded that adding bentonite to drought-affected soils physically improves the soil structure and fosters an increased microbial growth and diversity that would otherwise die during a dry spell. So basically, by creating stable pore spaces that hold water physically inbound between clay layers, bentonite reduces the agricultural demand for irrigation, which is great for everybody. So we know that studies indicate that alongside a 20% average increase in crop yields, bentonite amendments reduce fertilizer washout, overall water costs, as a permanent one-time application solution to combat shifting precipitation patterns that we're all experiencing right now. So that was probably a little bit more high level than what my typical audience might expect. So the droughts that we are currently experiencing and all over the globe have exposed the dual nature of bentonite clay. I think it's really interesting. So surface water vanishes, the clay's response is governed entirely by that context, and in an urban environment, bentonite is destructive. Its desiccation physically removes the earth from beneath our infrastructure, and it's very hard to overcome. But conversely, the agricultural sciences have successfully harnessed this exact behavior as a overall benefit. So as climate models predict increasingly severe and prolonged drought cycles, using bentonite and deploy it across our vulnerable farmlands that are highly affected by drought is going to become a critical component of the human adaptation and survival. And you might be thinking to yourself, man, bentonite sounds kind of important. I wonder where it comes from. And I have good news. This is not something that's going to be like blocked by the Strait of Hormuz right now. The US is the main supplier. It's the main global supplier of bentonite, followed by China. So we don't have to worry about that. So basically, bentonite doesn't really care what it's sitting on top of. It follows the water. The same clay that's swelling under a foundation in Texas is being drilled into farmland in Australia to save a crop, but the context is everything. And so is knowing what's beneath your feet before you commit to a piece of land or a house. So if you're buying somewhere and want honest eyes on the local hazards, the link's in my bio. So stay informed and stay grounded.